Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. You may have noticed it's been quite a few days since the last video I put up, and I was on the road for a bit of a music tour, which is all done now, and that was a lot of fun. Something that's been really nagging me the last week or so is that aside from making whole videos, I don't really have a great way to keep you guys updated on little stuff going on behind the scenes. So I think I'm going to give a Facebook page a try, as some people have suggested. And it'll be there for putting up little things, screenshots, and stuff like that, which isn't quite big enough to warrant a whole video, but it could make it easier for some of you to follow the channel, especially for people who don't have a YouTube account. Anyway, I'll have the link in the description if you're interested in following along with that. So today's topic is petards, and it's going to be a bit more than just when petards are commonly used, and instead in what situations they're mathematically cost effective, meaning the cost to you in producing them is less than your opponent's cost to replace whatever they blew up. You don't see them online very often and almost never in large groups, and I want to know, is there a good reason for that? So let's check it out. Just to give a bit of basic info about petards, they're a human siege unit, we could say. They have a one-time use with an advertised attack of 25, but a bonus damage against buildings on the order of about 500 damage. We can see this house went down from 900 to 375 in one hit, so that's the 25 basic damage plus 500 extra. Wow, that's a lot. They actually do more than 600 damage against castles too. As many of you probably know, they also do splash damage, so they hurt any units that they're directly touching when they hit a target, or if they're destroyed. Remember, it's only 25 attack to units though, which isn't a whole lot considering many infantry units have 10 to 15 attack and can attack many times. Although you might suspect that they're classified as maybe infantry or gunpowder, they're actually siege units. So unlike gunpowder units, they don't require chemistry research, and they're available to the Mesoamerican civs, and they're also affected by siege engineers. Good to know is that the siege engineers tech doesn't change their attack against units. It's still 25 attack, but against buildings they do around 200 more damage. So around 700 instead of 500 to houses, and 805 instead of 605 to castles. We can also see that they aren't treated as infantry with the Celts, as they don't get the infantry speed bonus. They also don't benefit from the Celts' unique tech that gives Siege Workshop units 50% more health, so they're a non-Siege Workshop siege unit. Unlike what you might expect with other siege though, the Mangadai anti-siege bonus doesn't count toward them, and they take normal damage once you factor in the 2 pierce armor. There's also rumor going around that they take bonus damage from towers and castles, similar to ships and camels, which is supposedly enhanced even further with heated shot. To be honest, that's not what happened in my test, where even with heated shot, petards took the exact same damage they should without any bonus, whereas camels and ships clearly take more damage. Even if I haven't observed them taking bonus damage from towers, it's still fair to say that given their low HP and pierce armor, towers and castles are a major concern for them. One downside to petards is their single use, which limits their damage output at a set value to one target. A similar costing champion, on the other hand, could theoretically do an infinite amount of damage given infinite time. Obviously that's not a realistic scenario, but it means petards are more specialized for quick surprise attacks. I know I'm taking a while to get there, but in this video what I'm interested in is whether they have more than shock value as a gimmick, and in what situations they're actually cost effective over the long run. Just a quick note before we look at the numbers, all the tests I'm doing are with the HD version, which probably covers the version that you're playing, but just know that in the Forgotten Empires expansion, petards are 15 food cheaper. So first let's look at their cost effectiveness against buildings. Here they're expected to do well since they're getting hundreds in bonus damage. I ran a test with a series of castles, towers, walls, and other buildings. I did separate runs with Castle Age petards without siege engineers, and post-imperial petards with siege engineers. I know there's a lot of numbers and stuff, but what we're looking for is an effectiveness ratio greater than 1. The number represents the cost that it takes your opponent to replace what costs you 1 resource in petards to destroy. So a value of 0.5 means that for what you spent in petards to destroy that building, your opponent had to spend half that much to rebuild it. One overwhelming pattern we can't ignore is that there are a lot of really low numbers here, Looking specifically at castles, basically if you're going after a castle, you'll need from 6 to 14 Petards to take it out, depending on what civilization you're against and what techs they have and if you have siege engineers. Remember to bring a few extra, since this is the number needed to hit the castle, and you might lose a few on the approach. Generally, I'd err on the more conservative side and send 4 or 5 extra, to be honest. Getting siege engineers reduces the number of Petards you need by roughly 25% across the board. Now please remember that this is assuming every single one of your Petards hits the castle, which isn't necessarily going to happen. That being said, for castles, the only time Petards are actually cost effective is if you're using siege engineers against a castle with no masonry upgrade, implying that you're post-imperial and they're in castle age. In general, the 10 or 12 Petards you'll need to do it will take out the castle, but they'll cost you around 1,000 or 1,200 resources, whereas the castle was only 650 stone. Maybe that's worth it to you, and stone tends to be a little bit tight in the late game, and there can be strategic map control reasons, etc. But just know that unless you're highly valuing those other factors, this isn't a good move solely on cost effectiveness. Looking at towers now, it's a progressively worse trade-off as the game goes on and the towers are upgraded. You're never quite coming out even when using Petards against towers in Castle Age, and it just gets worse later in the game. You'll need between 2 and 6 depending on technology factors, but you'll always come out worse for using them against towers. Again, if wasting their stone or securing a hill is important to you, this may be worth it, but I'm interested in cost effectiveness, and there's no situation I can recommend using them with that criteria. Now, walls are an interesting one. It takes between 1 and 3 Petards to take out a wall or gate. Now, they'll never even be close to cost effective in a direct comparison because wall tiles are so cheap. But this is one of those times you're probably going to be doing it in order to let your army into their base. So depending on how that attack goes, the whole thing may be cost effective in the grand scheme of things. Now keep in mind that with siege engineers it only takes 2 Petards to take out a gate in a fortified wall, and 3 Petards will always be safe to take out any wall or gate. That might be worth remembering in arena maps, for example. As for the other types of buildings that you'll come across in a town, it's generally 3 to 6 Petards to take out each building, or 2 to 5 after siege engineers is researched. While it's not necessarily cost effective, the damage you do to their base can pay back in other ways. Speaking for myself here, I'd probably pick siege workshop units over Petards to destroy a base, since a few rams would cost a lot less and give you the potential to take out a greater number of buildings with what you have. Your best target is the town center, and don't waste your time taking out houses. They cost a third of one of your Petards, and that's just blowing up your resources. The only exception for when Petards are cost effective against a non-defensive building is wonders, where they can easily pay for themselves several times over. It's still going to take 9 to 12 Petards to take it down, but wonders, as we know, are expensive, so that makes sense that they cost more than the Petards needed to destroy them. Okay, well so far this isn't looking all that great for the Petards. Even if we factor in the cheaper cost in the Forgotten Empires, we get the same results, just everything looks not quite as bleak. We could probably make an argument that taking out a town center has lots of other economic disruption impacts not taken into account here, and taking down a gate, military production building, or house may have other situational impacts on the game for sure. But looking at the Petard's damage directly and the cost to replace those buildings, it's seeming like you're probably doing more damage to yourself than to your opponent, which is interesting. As a side question related to this, we might wonder what if the opponent is making units in a building while it's destroyed. Well, it turns out, if you didn't know this, all those resources are returned to you, even the cost on the unit that you are currently constructing. So, yeah. What about against other units, though? They do technically have 25 attack, which seems pretty good. And remember that Petards actually do damage to all the enemy units around them when they die. So it's like a cataphract trample damage effect, but 5 times stronger. In case you're wondering as well, that damage is not done to friendly units, whether they be Petards or some other military unit, and even your nearby farms and buildings are safe from damage. Now, rather than look at every single unit in the game, I'm going to narrow the list to using Petards against a variety of relatively common castle and imperial units, just to give you a sense of whether this is effective or not. First, let's look at villagers. Bearing in mind that Petards cost double what villagers do, we do a bit of math, and it means that a mass of Petards is only effective against villagers if it can hit at least 3 on every detonation. Okay, well you might say I'll just send them into a group of villagers close together, and they should hit at least 3 on average, right? Well, it's actually harder to do than you might think, given the 1-tile blast radius, and using equal resources of villagers and petards. Even if I surround the petards and try to attack them with the villagers, it's still a very bad trade-off, and most of the villagers survive. So I would recommend not using them to take out villagers in general, especially when the 80 food cost is the same as if you like cavalry, which are going to be much more effective. Okay, so if they're not good against villagers, they're definitely not going to be good against champions. Here we have 30 champions and 24 petards, which cost the same in total resources, and just letting them go at each other, the champions dominate. This is clearly not cost effective for the petards at all in this case. Against arbalists, elite skirmishers, and crossbows, your petard army would have to again average hitting 3 in every explosion in order to end up being cost effective in the long run, which is possible if the archery range units are bunched up, but then you'd also have to factor in losses from the arrow fire. I wouldn't outright recommend the petard as a counter to the archery range units, but if you can get the petards in close range, they can be surprisingly effective. This is especially true with hand cannoneers, and they can even be cost effective to use petards against them as long as they can hit 2 hand cannoneers on average. That's a bit more realistic, and assuming the hand cannoneer doesn't fire back, the petards can actually take out an army of hand cannoneers of equal cost. That might sound like it's stretching it a bit, not having them fire back, but to be honest, this is as good as it's been so far. Of course, this also highlights the importance when fighting mass petards in staggered formation, which greatly reduces the number of your units which are hit in each explosion. Likewise, they won't be cost effective against Huskarls and Eagles unless you're hitting 3 or 4 at once, depending on upgrades. They won't be effective against Knights unless they're hitting 5 per detonation, and they aren't cost effective against Paladins unless they're surrounded by 7 Paladins and manage to damage all of them. These are increasingly unlikely scenarios, and it's getting hard to believe that you'll be able to reliably use petards cost effectively against any of these units. I think hand cannoneers were probably the best we're gonna do. One really unfortunate thing is that petards can't go inside rams, since petards are siege, so getting them up to the enemy units is generally hard, and you're gonna lose a lot of them for free. But what about against other siege units though? This is a completely different story. A petard can take out any unit from the catapult line in one hit, from Mangonel to Siege Onager, as well as a heavy scorpion. That means assuming they can reach the targets, they'll do much more than their money's worth. Even against battering rams, while they don't kill them in one hit, 2 petards can destroy a battering ram, which costs more than the 2 of them. You'll need 3 against a siege ram to leave it with 6 HP, which isn't cost effective anymore, but it's probably still worth it if that ram is in your base. Trebuchets take 2 hits from a petard, and since they cost 400 resources to make, that's a very favorable exchange for the petard again. I have to say, they're not that great against buildings in the long run, and they're pretty bad against most military units, but they're actually a very surprisingly effective choice against siege units. This probably works best in a chaotic situation near your castles, where your opponent has their siege spread out or is unprotected, as Petard Rush isn't as much of a legitimate threat in the open battlefield, and it has the same basic weaknesses as infantry units doing the same thing. The real question though is, are they effective against other Petards? That's kind of what I expected to happen. So that's the main units and buildings that I could think of. It looks like Petards are decent against siege and poking surprise holes in a wall, but not a whole lot else. Still, it'd be nice to see them used a bit more often, and I may have to do just that. That's all for this one. Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to check out the Facebook page if you're interested in that. Take it easy, and I will see you next time.